Hello, and thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Director's Cut, brought to you by the Directors Guild of America, where each episode we bring you a fresh and insightful interview featuring one of the film industry's top directors, conducted by one of their peers. Take a second to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. This episode takes us behind the scenes of director Lynn Shelton's new comedic drama, Sword of Trust. The film tells the story of Cynthia, who learns that her inheritance from her deceased grandfather is an antique sword that he believed was proof that the South won the Civil War. To sell the sword, Cynthia and her friend Mary team up with a cantankerous pawnshop owner and his man-child employee, who've discovered there's a market for the relic. Their ensuing adventure becomes a journey into the depths of conspiracy theories and Southern disillusionment. In addition to Sword of Trust, Ms. Shelton's credits include the feature films Outside In, We Go Way Back, My Effortless Brilliance, Hump Day, Your Sister's Sister, Touchy Feely, and Laggies, as well as episodes of the television series New Girl, The Mindy Project, Master of None, Casual, Fresh Off the Boat, and Glow. Following a recent screening of the film at the Harmony Gold Theater in Los Angeles, Ms. Shelton spoke with director Jake Kasdan about filming Sword of Trust. During their conversation, she discusses her desire to return to her roots of improvisation, her creative collaboration with actor and comedian Mark Maron, and how one of the characters was inspired by a lift trip with a flat earther.
Cool, thank you. Hey.
Hi, you guys. Thanks for coming and staying.
Hi there. Well, I loved this movie. I just saw it the other day. Lynn and I have worked together for a lot of years through working on TV shows and things like that, and I've always been a fan since before that. I try to see them all. You make a lot of stuff. You're really prolific, and that's something I want to talk to you about a little bit. But I saw this movie. I just loved it so much.
Thanks, Jake.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally. It's populated entirely with actors that I just love. You have everyone in this thing.
Me too.
Is somebody that I would go to in almost anything. And mostly not people I've worked with, but all people I've always wanted to work with. I worked with Michaela once. I thought she was incredible. Was the cast sort of the impetus for this, or to start with sort of the most, it's not the most original question, but it's definitely a movie that I really want to know the answer, which is, where did this one come from? Sort of what was the genesis for this for you?
It was Mark Maron. Mm-hmm. I really wanted to work with him. I met him on his podcast, WTF, that he was kind enough to have me on almost exactly 4 years ago, summer of 2015. He had just talked to the president, and I was like, he's not going to want to talk to me. But we pitched me to him, and he was like, sure, yeah, no, I like her movies. I want to talk to her. So we got along really well, and TV directing, the sort of topic of TV directing came up, and he was like, will you direct my show? And I was like, sure. So he had this show on IFC called Maron that was based on him and his material. So I got to direct the first couple episodes of that fourth season, which turns out to have been a really the most challenging season for his character, because he had fallen off the wagon. It was sort of a fictionalized what would happen if Mark, or a version of Mark had, actually gone off the wagon and sort of hit bottom again and had to find his way back to sobriety. And so it was a very vulnerable, it's like gave him a lot of opportunity to really try out some acting range that he hadn't had the experience, the chance to do before. And I loved working with him. I just loved working with him. And I really felt like he was such a natural actor, and he would sort of come in with, ready to listen, ready to be engaged. And he was open, and he had his lines memorized, but it was pretty unshaped, and I would give him an adjustment, and he would just focus up and click in. And all of a sudden it was stuff would happen that was so exciting. And I felt like I was part of that process in a really exciting way, and I just was compelled by his on-screen presence, and I sort of saw untapped depths that I wanted to explore, and I wanted the world to see. So right from the get-go, that was 3.5 years ago, I said afterwards, I felt like we had built a certain amount of trust together, and And we started writing a movie, and not this one, a different movie. And he's never made a movie before, and I had made several, but he didn't really understand that it was possible to do it. So it just kept sort of, we're still trying to get through the first draft of that movie. And I got really frustrated at a certain point, and I said, I just want to get on set with you, but I can't do it until we have the script done. And he was like, well, this will happen in its own time.
Together.
Yes, exactly. It'll happen, it happen in its own time. But if you really, really want to get on a set with me, just like go write another movie for him with the part for me, and I'll do it. I'm sure I can carve out like a couple weeks and whatever. But he always says he really didn't think it would happen. And I show up a couple months later, I'm like, all right, I got the movie. Where's my 2 weeks? We're going to make this thing. And he's like, oh, really? Okay. But there were a few things I wanted to do with it in addition to working with Mark. I wanted to go back to my roots of working with improvisation, which I hadn't done for a while. So the last time I made an improvisation-based movie was Your Sister's Sister, which I made in 2010. And since then, I've made 3 other films, thank you, that were scripted, and done a lot of TV that was scripted. And I was sort of like, okay, I was itching to go back to that. But I had learned that you really needed a very specific cast of actors, because not everybody can do that. And so I had been sort of collecting a lot of, because I've done so much TV. I've done a lot of guest episodic work in the last few years. I've worked with Michaela on her show Casual, which was on Hulu, and we loved working together. And so I knew that she was great at it. And then she was the one who suggested Jillian Bell, and Jillian brought in John Bass. And Mike O'Brien, who I worked with on AP Bio, he's the creator of this NBC show AP Bio, and I directed the finale of his first season of his show, and really got along with him and asked if he would co-write it with me. And originally we thought he was going to be in it. He comes from the SNL world and from Chicago improv world. And so he found me Tim Paul and Whitmer Thomas, who played Jake and Zeke, as well as I'd worked with Dan Bacadal on the Mindy Project. We met for a quick minute, and I brought him up as like, what about him as the heavy? And he was like, oh, he was like king of the improv scene in Chicago. He's one of the best improvisers I know, So it was like all these people. And then Toby Huss, who plays Hogjaws. Oh my God.
Brilliant.
Genius actor. He's one of those guys who can do anything. Broad comedy, small comedy, naturalism, dramatic. He's just brilliant. Yeah. And that guy I've known, we used to do theater. We were in the same sort of performance theater, downtown theater scene in New York, like decades ago. So I've known him forever. And we've never been able to work together until now. So yeah, all those people we're a very carefully curated cast. And I wanted to give myself the opportunity to do something I've never done before genre-wise, which was to go a little off the rails plot-wise. Like I've made dramatic comedies and one drama, and it was always like every beat of every scene had to feel like it could really happen in the real world. And I just wanted to let myself actually have some fun and go a little more screwball comedy, have emotionally grounded characters that resonated and you cared about. But let them just go into, make a comedy caper, get normal people who just get in over their heads, sort of Pineapple Express, Fish Called Wanda kind of style.
Yeah. And so when you talk about writing it, but also talk about it being improvised, what is that process? How does that work for you?
So in this case, it looks a little different every time. Like Hump Day was a 10-page treatment that had no dialogue, but it was just every scene was described, what would happen exposition-wise, emotional dynamics in the the characters, the relationships. Your Sister's Sister was an 80-page script. Some of the scenes were sketchy, but most of them were written out so that there was a safety net and some sort of lines for the actors to kind of that they could riff off of, they could use or not at their will, And this was like a 50-page, I call it a scriptment. It was like half script, half treatment. And some of the scenes, like the scene between Deirdre and Mel, for instance, was actually really written out. And Deirdre, I would go in and I would kind of like my song and dance to try and get money from him was a little different, was a little looser every time. But all of his rejoinders, everything he said to me was basically as written. It was on the page. And there were other scenes that were sort of written out like that too. And then the scene in the back of the van, which was arguably the heart of the whole movie, said they get to know each other in the back of the van.
Wow.
And I knew it was going to fulfill a very specific purpose. I had a feeling, but I wasn't sure exactly what or how it would work. And then by the time we shot it, I was like, okay, these people have to start to gain trust with each other, and I want to really feel like they're real people. So I want to know about their hopes and dreams. And this is the opportunity to do that. Now, before going in, the other thing is that before even showing up on set, I'd spent time with each of those actors usually in relationship with actors that they had previous relationships with. The characters are supposed to have previous relationships with, right? So like Michaela and Jillian and I all got together and talked about that relationship of that couple, how they met, what their backstory was, what their hopes and dreams were if they got the money, all that stuff was sort of laid out. But they get to participate in that, Right. So Jillian came up with the whole escape room thing, and then I got John Bass and Mark to spend time together. John immediately annoyed Mark, which was fantastic for the relationship between the two characters. They both sort of played off of it, but it was they found their dynamic, immediately. And Mark and I talked a lot about this relationship, this past history between Mal and Deirdre and what that would look like. So they didn't make all that up on the spot. They had some stuff backloaded.
But how they're talking about it and what they're
totally
saying.
Finding their way through the beats of the scene. And like and we did it several times, and there was a lot more to it. It was 9 hours in the back of a very hot van in a very, very hot, unair conditioned studio. And by the end, the close-up on Mark in the most beautiful part of the movie, of that performance, which I can't get over how much I love it. It's one of the best performances I've seen by anyone in anything. Yeah. And it was one of the very last takes that we did. And he was so worn out by then, as well as really angry and aggravated, honestly. But the way that he channeled all of that into the performance just blows me away, and not only had he found the shape of what, because it's different every time we do it, of course, and so not only had he sort of found what the story was, but he also was able to really put, Yeah.
He's a perfect person to do that. And I didn't realize until afterwards the extent to which you were sort of how the improvisation, that it was heavily improvised, because to me, it feels really like great writing. And you can feel that, and I suppose there is a sort of a writing process afterwards with that too. So you must become, the editing then is where you're really putting together a lot of that, deciding what you're going to say, what you're not going to say, how long everything's going to be, what the proportions of the movie are.
Yeah, it was 2.5 hours long, the first cut. And that wasn't like a super fat, that was like gold, especially comedically. It was just like, this is all so funny and so great. And there was so much more of every character, right? So in the back of the van, they all had long stories that they told. And I think the whole thing ended up being like 45 to 50 minutes long, the entire take that we went through everybody's stories. And for instance, and there was just all of this extra comedic stuff. And I kept telling Mark he was the center of the movie, and he kept saying, doesn't feel like it. I mean, I'm hardly saying anything. I'm just this straight guy and all these one man, one woman shows going on around me, because they were all doing characters, and he just really can be himself. They come from a comedic improvisational world, and he doesn't. He's just, he really was the straight man. But I was like, no, but you're also being really funny too. You're getting a lot of the laughs. And he just didn't believe me at all until he saw it on screen. Yeah, at South by Southwest, because it was so hard to tell. I mean, you got to understand, this is a guy whose main thing, he's been doing stand-up for 35 years, and he's used to going up there. And it's interesting because he actually creates his material through improvisation, because he doesn't sit down and write jokes. He tells the story. He tells these, he forms his material on stage every night. He works it out. And then he learned how to really listen and give stage time, to somebody else through his podcast, where he does these long form interviews. Yeah. And so I feel like that actually is one of the things that really made him both of those things made him a great, improvisational actor.
And he starts the podcast with 10 minutes of him talking to himself, basically.
Extemporaneously.
About his own,
exactly. And then he went through 4 seasons of his own show. Like if you see his first season of Maron is pretty rough acting wise, and he knew that he would take a hit, that he would have to learn how to how do people touch their hair? Yeah. Everything was very self-conscious. And then he just started to lose that. And you see even the second season, he's way better. And by third and fourth season, he's just sort of,
and you had worked together on Glow as well?
Yeah, which was total serendipity. Like we were trying to write this movie, and I got a gig to direct an episode of that season, months before he even auditioned he got cast.
Oh, really?
It was crazy. Yeah, it just happened of all the TV shows in all the world. And we had a great time working together on that, several episodes. And then he asked me to do his direct his special, his last comedy special for Netflix. So we just sort of became creative collaborators.
Yeah, it's become a major collaboration.
Yeah.
It's cool. It's great. Yeah. And how long did you shoot this movie for? How long, when you make a movie like that way?
I willed it into existence. I put some of my own money into it for the first time. And, I had this whole cast. I had my editor in place. Everybody was sort of ready
Seems like
to
you
go.
put the crew together with a lot of people you've been working with on episodic.
Yes. And I worked, as it turns out, my DP I was a camera operator on Glow and a DP on Casual. He'd worked with 2 of the actors and several of the crew. Yeah. And my editor I met on Glow. And my John Lavin I've worked with
on all my
movies since Your Sister. He's worked with me for years and years. He came in from Seattle. And everybody else was a local Alabama. They all were, our gaffer was also from LA, but everybody else was local crew in Alabama. Ted Speaker is a friend I met. He has a programmer at the Sidewalk Film Festival in Birmingham, Alabama with my very first feature film back in 2006. He was a fan of that film and we kept in touch since then. He helped me out on he made all the music for my second feature and created my website and we were, friends from way back. And then he sort of built up his producing career. And when I asked if he would produce this, it was sort of perfect timing for him in his career. And so he said, as long as you can move it to Alabama, I can do it. And it just needed to be set in the South. So that sort of worked out perfectly. We shot it in 12 days.
Wow.
And the reason was that Mark had said he's a busy guy, and he told me he could give me 2 weeks. So I was like, all right, 12 days on, 2 days off, 12 days on. That's what I got. And the thing that was great about that is it was so much easier to get all that cast because that entire cast, they're constantly working. They're really heavily working actors. Yeah. And to ask anybody to do, this was like SAG minimum. They were not doing it for the paycheck, and it was really come out to Alabama, have fun with these amazing actors. We're going to have a summer camp style, time in incredibly humid heat. As it turns out.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you did it when
May.
It was
in Birmingham, Alabama. Yeah, I didn't. I thought, okay, August. Obviously we've been reasonable, but early May, no. Turns out horrible. Yeah, it was really, really rough. But yeah, so I specifically wrote it. There are no night exteriors. There's no night actually at all. I knew I needed a long driving scene, and I put them all in a windowless van so I could put them in a studio and just rock it with grips. No process work, everything. The pawn shop, we were 5 days in the pawn shop and 3 days on that farm. And then, a few days of a few more locations, but it was built to be producible.
Right. Yeah. It's contained, but that's fast by any measure to make
That was insane. My AD and I,
but probably really exhilarating.
Just so exciting. I mean, the thing I'd been itching to do improv again, but it is terrifying because you are writing a bulk of the movie on set. Right. And my past movies that I'd done in that fashion, it was 2, maybe 3 people per scene. And this was 4 to 8 people in a scene. And we had 2 cameras, but we only had 2 cameras, and you had to cover all those people. So we were like, okay, we're going to do dueling 2 shots. We're going to get the meat and potatoes of our scene. You don't want to rehearse because the first time might be the time, And it's just such a beautiful way to work because you get these genuine reactions. People are actually engaged. They have to be listening. They're not pretending like they don't know what the next person is going to be saying. They really don't know. They have no idea. And you can feel it. You really can feel it, I think, as an audience member. There's something kind of, vital about it. Yeah. And then, just going back to the editing is absolutely essential. There were so many different versions of this movie that could have come out. And we went from when we had the 2.5-hour cut, for me, I just feel very strongly that a comedy, my movies, I like to have 90 minutes, ish at least, if they're comedies. And I didn't know how I was going to cut out 3 minutes, much less an hour of that movie. It just seemed impossible at the beginning. And we found that it just got sharper and sharper and better, and the more that we kind of honed it to make Mel's emotional arc, the sort of core of it, the better it was. I'd say the back of the van scene was the one that went through the most iterations, just contracting, expanding, what's the balance of how long does it take for him to get to that moment,
So when you're working that way, what do you do if it feels like it isn't working?
On set?
Yeah. Which must happen occasionally, right?
Yeah.
Or a scene isn't working, I mean.
Right.
What you're doing in the moment.
Well, for instance, the one that leaps to mind is Jimmy was a non-actor. And we had a really hard time finding that guy. He lived in Birmingham, and we were looking at actors, and none of them could improvise. And this guy, the local casting director, came up with this idea. He's like, well, let's talk to this guy, because he's like a kind of a spoken word. He's a teacher and a spoken word poet guy, sort of a slam poet guy. He's a really interesting character. And I used to do rap and stuff. And he was great. He was so great. But there was one scene that was a little bit I had too many scenes. I had too many lines that were written. And as soon as he tried to tackle, it was really not working. And I basically, what I did was I said, okay, we're going to come back to it because I have to reshape it and I have to make it more, I have to simplify it and kind of make it something that he can handle. And so I just sort of, I just kind of revisited it and sort of reshaped it so that it would be more in his voice and he could be more,
left it and then returned to the scene, you mean?
Yeah, yeah. But I have to say, it didn't ever really happen other than that one time. There was another scene that got cut. Luckily, it was able to just be cut altogether with another local actor that just wasn't, I never believed it. It never quite worked. And then I realized ultimately we didn't need it it was like one more person, like we had those Jake and Zeke characters come to try to get the sword. Somebody else showed up originally to make another offer. Mm-hmm. And it made him realize, it really is worth this amount of money or something. But then I realized, we don't actually need it after all. So there was one scene that got cut altogether. But with the core actors, I have to say that it was not. Yeah, it's all about casting. You just got to, if any one of those actors had not been up to the task, I would have been screwed. Yeah. I would have been totally screwed. I just didn't have time, for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in terms of the story and what it's about, what was I thought it was just so interesting and funny and such an interesting way because the movie's really sort of topical, but in this very sideways, surprising way that no one would, you'd never anticipate.
Well, I wanted to make a culturally relevant movie that referred to this post-truth era that we're living in, and but I didn't want to make a movie that would make you feel like slitting your wrists when you walked out. I get enough of that from real life, so so I wanted to make like-minded people feel validated in their, feelings of being disturbed by what's happening. I mean, conspiracy theories have been around forever, literally, but since the dawn of mankind, I think. But we're having a peak moment since we have a conspiracy theorist in chief, right? So I find it very upsetting. But it also it's caused me to think a lot about the nature of this human frailty towards us all being, having the ability to be suckers, right? So it was why I wanted one of our heroes to actually also have, a questionable belief system, to show that it's not, it's anybody susceptible, and that we all, and some conspiracy theories actually are true. It's interesting. It's a problem because if you realize, oh my God, this one is true, then it's like, well, then how can you trust anything? And it's just like, so yeah, the way that our brains work is it's a tricky thing, and I wanted to explore that. So it's interesting because it wasn't necessarily always going to be conspiracy theory based, though. Like the way I came up with it, I wanted to work with Mark. That was the very first seed. I was trying to think about what would be an interesting character and scenario for him. I literally was in a Lyft ride. We stopped in front of a pawn shop in LA. I can't remember which one it was, but I just looked over and saw this amazing looking pawn shop, and I just saw him in there. He always teases me about that. It's like, oh, so you just saw me among the displaced sad items. Just thought I belonged behind them. I was like, yeah, I did. It seemed like the perfect place for you. Yeah. And what a great setting, because any oddball can, walk into that kind of environment. And I knew that I had this idea of this sort of comedy caper idea, and like maybe a con, and then the conner would actually flip the con around, some kind of a con. And then I knew I wanted, I'd had this experience with a flat earther once before I knew that it was a thing. And it was basically what you saw was basically a replication of the way the guy introduced it to me. It was a Lyft driver. Again, I owe so much to Lyft. I was a long Lyft ride, and he was very normal seeming. And we had this nice chat. Yeah. My production designer had a great time making that model. And he, at the end of this conversation, he starts telling me about how the earth is flat. And I just was like, I couldn't even register what he was saying. Obviously he was joking, right? But he wasn't joking. I'm like, what is happening? And I'd never heard of it because I didn't know it was a thing yet, So he turns around and he says to me, he parks the car in front of my apartment. He looks at me and he says, exactly what Nathaniel says, which is basically, look, listen, I get it. You were exactly where I was a year ago. All you have to do is Google it. Just Google it. Just keep Googling. It's all there. It's undeniable. If you just Google deep enough. And I was like, thank you, sir. I'm putting that in a movie. Yeah. So I knew I wanted one of the characters to be a flat earther. That was sort of the beginning of the conspiracy theory thing. And then once we were trying to figure out the con and what would a story be that would make some artifact more valuable that came in, it just kind of organically emerged from there. Yeah.
But it has this great humanity to it in the way you treat everybody, the way the actors perform the parts, the way the characters interact with each other. And I think it's really it speaks to your sensibility and the humanity of your body of work is expressed here the same way. It's the same thing I remember loving about Hump Day and all the stuff in between. I feel like you've brought it to the TV work you do as well. So it expands into this bigger kind of, meditation on the moment we're in, but in a way that's really loving of all the people involved, which I thought was just a lovely it's a lovely treatment and way of thinking about these things.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I definitely, as a Northerner coming to the South, I didn't want to condescend to Southerners. I also didn't want to represent, the South inauthentically. So that was something I was very concerned about. And even the folks who I would consider sort of wrong-minded, individuals in this movie, I wanted to humanize them. I wanted everybody to feel like real humans, and not just nobody was to be a cardboard cutout or a cartoon or sort of two-dimensional. I wanted everybody to feel real.
There's that great moment when the kids pop up they've been taken and Mel says, "Oh, you're those guys."
That was Mark's idea.
I remember
that was Mark's idea, and I love it so much. I think it's so smart. To me, it felt like it immediately it humanizes them. It just makes them so, and they're trying so hard to be tough and bullies, but it just like everything just drops when that happens.
And it goes to his sort of philosophical approach on his show that I've always loved, which is he's basically talking to everyone with the fundamental unspoken thing is everyone is just a person, and I'm going to get to know the person.
Exactly.
And your movie does the same thing in a way and it's probably part of where you guys link up, and part of what you're illustrating in this stop in your shared journey. It's a cool thing. It looks like we're winding down, but totally great to talk to you about this. I love the
Jake.
movie.
Thanks for doing this.
Lynn Shelton, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks, you guys.
Thanks for listening to another DGA Q&A. If you'd like to hear more, you can find past episodes of The Director's Cut wherever you listen to podcasts. Stay tuned in the coming weeks as we'll have more great Q&As with directors Andrea Berloff and Quentin Tarantino. Be sure to subscribe and please take a moment to rate and review us. We'd love to hear your feedback, and you can help fellow cinephiles find the show. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time. This podcast is produced by the Directors Guild of America. Music is by Dan Wally.